Hey, it's been a while since I've put up a video. And again, to make it easy on myself, I'm going to do something that's easy for myself, which is to go over some of the books I've been reading. Now, this is my Goodreads page of books that I have read in the order I logged that I read them. I may have missed some. This date isn't right, but that's okay. If you go through this, you'll see there's a lot of Discworld, Terry Pratchett books, Sherlock Holmes. I've got Jane Austen on there, and Agatha Christie. These are all what I would call comfort reading, as you have comfort food. So I'm not going to go over those. I want to go over the other items, and we're just going to go through it quickly. I think I may have covered some of these before. I know I talked about Journal of the Plague Year, but I want to bring it up. I am on a Daniel Defoe kick recently. He's a good read in many ways, but he can be very boring and tedious in other ways. So let's get through it. Okay, so first, Ants Aren't Gentlemen, or Aunts Aren't Gentlemen. I can't do a British accent, sorry. By P.G. Wodehouse. And I am a big Jeeves and Wooster fan. I love the one with Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry is the butler Jeeves, and Hugh Laurie is the lovable airhead Bertie Wooster. Though, if you pay attention in the books, he's not as stupid as you would think. What he mainly is a social coward, is what I would put it, because a lot of people realize they can just push him into a situation that he doesn't really like. But he doesn't say no. He doesn't push back most of the time. Jeeves is very savvy as the butler. If you've never read any Jeeves and Wooster before, actually the Jeeves and Wooster TV show with Fry and Laurie is probably your best bet. Because here's the thing. I want to talk about this book. This is not where you would start if you want to read Jeeves and Wooster anyway. The problem is that Wodehouse eventually got around to writing novels, whereas I think the original Jeeves and Wooster were all short stories, and it works really well as short stories, little standalone pieces. But then he tries to shove it all into, say, a novel-type structure, and that doesn't work. So I would say it's better to try to find the Jeeves and Wooster short story compilations, and there's lots of them, rather than try at one of his novels, because he basically builds his plots as a series of short stories. It doesn't really work as a novel. Moving on. Moll Flanders. This is a classic book, partially because it's by Daniel Defoe. It was very popular, and going through it and seeing how it ends, that's just like Robinson Crusoe. If you've never read Robinson Crusoe, and so up until I didn't realize that about 80% of the novel, Robinson Crusoe, is by himself. Okay, actually, a lot of the beginning is him getting, captured by pirates and sold into slavery and escaping, and it happening a few times before he finally ends up on the island where he, 20 years later, runs into Friday and some of the other people. So Robinson Crusoe, really, as a novel, it is very bizarre. I would say all of Defoe's writings are bizarre to us today because he wasn't really a novelist. He was a journalist. Journal of the Plague Year, actually, I'm just going to jump to that. I know I've reviewed it before. This is very important. I think I've tried not to say too much about what I thought was going to happen with COVID-19, because people are really not going to like what I have to say. It doesn't matter science. They had science in Defoe's day. They actually had a very good idea of how to stop the infection from spreading. They may not have known about the rats, but they did know that if you quarantine a house with one or two infected people, the rest of the people in the house would get infected. There was just no way that would not happen. They knew that over 80% fatality rate, case fatality rate. They even knew, and this is in Journal of the Plague here, they knew that there were microscopic creatures that were involved, or maybe not creatures, but there were ways like you could spit, the person could spit the sputum or the pus or whatever from the buboes could be put on a slide in one of these newfangled microscopes, which were high tech at the time, though that had been invented decades before, but tech didn't grow as fast then. In any case, they had a good idea. They did quarantines. They didn't have plague houses, which is what Daniel Defoe recommended, and that's like plague hospitals, you could say, where you take the people. This is the problem that happened in the U.S. Like with nursing homes, you should take the people to a special location hospital, and they don't get to go back until they're not contagious anymore. They can't spread the disease anymore. Well, that's not what happened. In any case, well, not in some states. Evidently, that's how they did it in, say, states like Florida. That's not how they did it in states like Michigan, Connecticut, New York, and on and on. Okay. In any case, that was Journal of the Plague Year. I highly recommend. It's often called a novel. It really isn't. It is almost entirely nonfiction with a little bit of embellishment. If I go to Moll Flanders is a novel of a sort, but it could be based on the exploits of a woman, and I can't remember if it's King Molly or Queen Molly or something like that, who was notorious because you get through it. There's all sort of, I don't want to get into all of there's a lot of titillating detail that would have been very titillating for the time. There's a lot of shenanigans, of course, of the sexual nature going on. But the parts that, most people would find very interesting are when she's a pickpocket and a thief, and she explains her exploits. And that's where the obviously journalistic Defoe comes through, because he is setting down stories that were told of women from Newgate Prison who talked about their exploits in pickpocketing and thievery. Anyway. I do want to comment on something. Nadia May is listed as the narrator here, and she also goes by the name Wanda McCadden, and I think Wanda McCadden was her real name, and she used different names when she was a voice actor. She was also a narrator on A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman on the 14th century, and that's, of course, when the Black Death originally came to Europe. And again, it's interesting. I think it's a good idea to take the Journal of the Plague Year and A Distant Mirror, because they're kind of bookends. A Distant Mirror, and there's more than just the Black Death going on in this book, but obviously it's a big part of what goes on in it. But because of the Black Death and other things that were happening at the time, you were going from what I would call the High Middle Ages into the Renaissance at this point in time. And I really like Nadia May / Wanda McCadden as a narrator. She's a narrator on Barchester Towers, which I'm currently going through, but I will do that another time because I haven't finished it yet. Okay, Moll Flanders. Next one. Now, this says Daniel Defoe. This is not clear that Daniel Defoe actually wrote it. This was published originally. A General History of the Pirates from their first rise and settlement in the island of Providence to the present time. The present time being around the 1730 or so. It was published by one of Defoe's publishers. Defoe probably was involved in the publication of this book. He may have written parts of it. It actually came out in 2 volumes. There are aspects of it that come across like Daniel Defoe. There is some very wry humor in parts of this book, just like with Moll Flanders, actually. Both in Moll Flanders and in this book, the author has something to say about the effects, I wouldn't say just of poverty per se. Okay, so in Moll Flanders, she actually starts out pretty well. She was born of a woman who was in Newgate Prison for thievery or pickpocketing or something like that. who gets transported to the colonies. So they're not exactly as far as the colonies at that point. Moll Flanders is set in the late 1600s, I believe. Anyway, she goes over to Virginia at one point. But this general history of the pirates is mostly in the early 1700s, and Defoe, or whoever, but it does sound like Defoe, blames some of the problems on when the wars, maybe it's the Wars of the Spanish Succession. I don't know this history well enough. I don't care so much. But when peace treaties were signed, they didn't really have a standing navy in and actually it wasn't, I'm sitting here going, was it even the UK? Okay, maybe it was the UK at this point. Right. Because it was Queen Anne and it was the UK by then. Okay. In any case, that you had all of these sailors who basically didn't have anything else to do but to go pirate. Maybe you were officially a legal privateer for the Queen Anne, before, but once there was a peace, you were let go. So what do? You turn from privateer, which was a somewhat legally sanctioned, meaning the good sense that yes, you can go and raid French and Spanish ships. But now they're like, well, what do we do now? Well, I guess we're going to go pirate. And so we're going to harass Spanish and French ships, just like we did before, but also British ships carrying trade goods. So, yeah, this is an interesting book. A lot of our legends about pirates actually come from this book. It's compiled partly, and part of the reason people think Defoe did this is because of his journalistic style. Yes, there's some moralizing in it, like he has in all his books. This is the part you don't hear as much, because it's not a heavy-handed moralizing. But there is a lot of Christian moralization in Defoe's books. It's definitely in Robinson Crusoe. It's in Moll Flanders to a certain extent. And it's in this pirate book because he is not trying to glamorize whoever the author or authors are. Author is or authors are. He's not glamorizing the pirate life. He does go down pirate code. Some of the stories are very amusing if you don't think about all the other stuff that's going on. It's some of the brutality that they inflicted, but the author does go over some of the brutality. But, you know, he's pretty blunt. I mean, this is all, it's not just that they're only after money, but even when some were given a chance to go straight, they preferred that life. So, and then the other thing is volume 1, some of it was pretty straightforward and were not necessarily all that embellished. And then other stories were obviously embellished because there was no way anyone could have known the particular story because, you know, the specific people involved who would know were dead. So, you know, some of it was just conjecture, obviously. Okay, moving on. Jane Austen Book Club. It's cute. What can I say? If you're a Jane Austen fan, you might like this book, but you might not. It is a contemporary novel. I think it's from 2002 or so, and it's based around, you know, a fictional book club where they read each of Austen's completed novels. So not Sanditon and not some of the other, I should say, published completed novels. You know, there is a certain amount of parallelism between books chosen and the chapter you're in. So it's cute, it's fluffy. I understand a movie was made of it, but after having finished the book, it's not interesting enough to see the movie. Moving on, 3 Men in a Boat. This is a favorite comic book for me, and again, I may have already covered this one before. It's okay. 3 Men in a Boat is one of these episodic comedies. You could say it's not really a novel. It's just 3 buddies going on a river boat, you know, punting around, and they've got a dog on Earthsea. or however they say it. And there's a certain kind of dry humor that shows up in P.G. Wodehouse, in Terry Pratchett, in Douglas Adams. It has shown up in Stephen Fry, if you've ever read any of the stuff Stephen Fry has written. There is a certain kind of dry hilarity, and it's not just dry, it's like a situation where things just pile atop each other. There are asides, and don't worry, it's not like Tristram Shandy. There is a pretty straightforward, they're on the river, but there's often flashbacks to things they had done before. Anyway, it's a fun book. And then Connie Willis wrote a sci-fi takeoff called To Say Nothing of the Dog, which was kind of the subtitle of this book. Originally, 3 Men in a Boat, To Say Nothing of the Dog. So in Connie Willis's book, To Say Nothing of the Dog, which is a comic sci-fi, and it's a time-traveling plot, and I hate time-traveling plots, except I did like this book because they made it work in a way I liked. There are certain time-traveling plots that I like because the logic works out, such as 12 Monkeys, the movie. So, moving on. Let's see what else we got. Wisdom of Father Brown, the Father Brown Mysteries from Chesterton. Again, I may have covered this before, but the Father Brown Mysteries are quite odd compared to, say, the Agatha Christie ones or any of the golden age of mystery. Chesterton was a very odd fiction writer. Very Catholic, even before he officially became Catholic. Kind of hard to explain. Like the Napoleon of Notting Hill. That's a really weird book. Just The Man Who Was Thursday is bizarre. And then Man Alive. You know, I can't explain these books to you. They are so weird. So I have issues with Chesterton in general. I mean, I love the man, and I'm all for his cause for sainthood. Though I understand that's going to be really rough going. Archbishop Fulton or Colonel Fulton Sheen has a better chance than Chesterton, I believe. But I think Chesterton has brought more people to Catholicism in general than any writer that I know of. Anyway, I know I've mentioned Master and Margarita before. I really enjoy this book. It is this Russian book, and it's kind of a takeoff of what was going on in the bureaucratization, whatever, of the Soviet state. I think like in the 30s or so, this is a very, in Moscow specifically, what was happening with regards to the arts and just the bureaus and stuff. It is out there. I'm not sure what he's saying about Christianity, but that's not his real target as far as I can tell. Though there's some interesting things that he comments on with regards to Christianity too. So, moving on, and I think this is the last one. Oh, The Way of Salt. So this is, I'm just going to close out with this one. The Way of Salt, Understanding Japan and Sumo. Ash Warren has a Facebook group called Sumo Sumo Sumo. I'm a member, and we love sumo. But unfortunately, we haven't had sumo. Well, we had sumo in March, but there were no spectators, which was actually really interesting because we could hear and see a lot of things that are hard to hear and see when you've got stanzas full of people. Love my sumo. We didn't have sumo in May. I hope we have sumo in July, and a lot of us do. But The Way of Salt is kind of interesting because it talks about Japanese culture, and specifically the sumo culture, how they kind of mesh in general. It's not that long. It's not very complicated. You can be a total newbie to sumo and read this. There can be some issues, and I might have put it in my own, so in my own review, I'm just taking a look. He does dispel some myths, and he does put things in perspective that can be confusing if you're not Japanese, but you're starting to get into sumo, because some of the stuff is not specifically unique to sumo. It has to do with Japanese culture specifically. Fair enough. There were some issues with the editing of this because I think he's self-published. I don't have anything against self-published books, except there can be a quality issue with regards to grammar and other things that are not cleaned up. That said, I believe he's been cleaning it up as fans have been telling him, oh, you messed this up. And then he goes back. And that's one of the benefits, I guess, of having an ebook, because then you can go back and fix the text later. And then people will re-upload your book and they've got, the fixed text, which is nice. Because even for books like Agatha Christie and Jane Austen that I've read that have been professionally published, supposedly with editorial oversight, having the same problems. So it's really more of the quality of the editor. And if you self-publish, oftentimes editors yourself, if you don't want to splurge on paying for an editor. There are tools like Grammarly, but it can do only so much. I use Grammarly, I use spell check, obviously, but there are certain things that it's just not going to catch. Homophones is one of the problems, but they're getting better at it. Well, we'll see. Anyway, I've been reading a lot. I hope you've been enjoying yourself with regards to entertainment. Come, bye.